morning or good afternoon, I guess. We're at noon already. And thank you for joining us today. We are so excited to have Sarah Durant here joining us to talk about managing stress effectively. I think I need that this week. Sarah is a registered psychotherapist and founder and clinical director of the North Simcoe Therapy Network. Prior to founding the North Simcoe Therapy Network, she spent 5 years working at the GYMHiM program for concurrent disorders at Waypoint, and additionally has worked at CMHA, Addiction Services for York Region, and Homewood Health Center. She's passionate about providing accessible and effective therapy to individuals with a variety of mental health concerns. And I know she supports someone near and dear to my heart, and we are all very grateful for that. So thank you again for joining us. This week's fundraiser proceeds are supporting the Child and Youth and Family Waiting Room at the Community Health Hub. This specialty waiting room will provide a space that's welcoming, comforting, and safe for children and their families. It's designed to reduce anxiety during visits, offer space to play and have fun while waiting for an appointment, and increase receptivity to healthcare services. Our goal this week is $25,000, and we are just overwhelmed by the support that we've received, not only from our participants, but also from our sponsors. And I'd like to mention that today, our sponsor is Viva, and thank you so much for coming on board with us and sponsoring this session today. I'd also like to recognize our title sponsors, Brissette Concrete Forming, Midland Honda, Pure Country 106, and 104.1 The Dock. We are recording all sessions this week, and they will be posted on our YouTube page. So if you want to share this session with somebody else following this, or if you missed a session earlier in the week, please feel free to do that. We also have a number of businesses on board that are supporting by donating a portion of their proceeds. Today is Phil's Casual Dining in Midland and Penetang. So if you get the chance, head on over and grab yourself some lunch or dinner, and you can support the event in that way. And with that, I will turn it over to Sarah. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Christy. I appreciate it. Well, welcome, everyone. I wasn't sure how many people we would get. It's such a beautiful day, and hopefully there are many outside enjoying the sun. And we will finish up in, within the hour, and then hopefully you all can get out and enjoy some of this spring day. So I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint to use as a bit of a reference. So we're going to talk about managing stress effectively. If people are wanting to participate, or if you have questions, feel free to unmute yourself, ask if you're uncomfortable with that. There's the chat box, which I always struggle remembering to read. Or if there are things you'd like to chat about or talk to me about individually following the session, you're welcome to shoot me an email. So my email address is really easy. It's Sarah with an H at midlandtherapy.com. Let me just screen share here, and we will open up the PowerPoint. Okay. So managing stress effectively. I love talking about this topic because this is something that has been incredibly important to me in my life. Like many people, I, for a long time, felt that I had to endure the suffering that comes along with unavoidable stresses that are happening around me or within me. And once I identified effective ways of managing my stress, life got a whole lot easier. And as I work with people every day that have a variety of different concerns and issues, managing stress is something that comes up for everyone, as I'm sure you all can relate to. So let's jump into some of this. I want to very quickly do an introduction to stress and how it affects the mind and body, but I'm really going to just jump over that. I think most of us can identify with how stress feels, certainly. And most of us are fairly familiar with the stress response and how, the negative effects of stress can affect us in the short term and long term. Like I said, I'm going to do a brief review of that. If you're interested in learning more, there's tons of stuff you can find online and some references in the PowerPoint. But what I really want to focus on today is managing stress. And in particular, identifying coping skills that work. I can't tell you how many people I have had come into my office, now virtual, not in person, and say that they have met with counselors and they have tried to access supports, but they couldn't really apply the skills that were being introduced to them. And, I realized that we are all very different and we all require different coping mechanisms and distress tolerance approaches. And so we have to find the skills that work for us. However, there are a few concepts and skills that seem to be incredibly effective for most people. And so when we get to the coping skills section, rather than putting an exhaustive list of coping skills, which I certainly have if you're interested in more, I thought we would focus our energy on some really common ones that many of us are aware of, but often put on the back burner and don't recognize how helpful they can be. So we're gonna jump right into this. So stress. We all have different kinds of stress in our lives, from minor irritants to those keep you up in the middle of the night stresses. And they're important. So stress serves a purpose, and there are many advantages to stress. It can keep us focused on our priorities. Stress can give us the momentum to, meet deadlines and keep us, doing what we need to do. It can keep us safe. However, most of us are, very familiar with the disadvantages of stress, and especially chronic stress and what that can do to our mind and body and overall quality of life. It's important to note that good stress is still stress. So sometimes, people will be, confused. They may have some really wonderful things going on in their life, but yet they're still experiencing, the effects of stress. And that's because, getting a new job, moving to a new home, starting a new relationship, all fabulous things for many people. However, it still comes with stress, and it still affects your body and your mind often in similar ways as not so good stress can. So something to just keep in mind. I also like to point out the difference between mental health and mental illness. So just because someone may have, poor mental health does not mean that they necessarily have a mental illness. And someone who has a mental illness may not necessarily have poor mental health. And so the way that we can understand the difference is, let's say we have Bob, who has no mental illness diagnosed. However, he's not sleeping well, he's not eating well, he is having some interpersonal issues with his spouse, etc. His mental health may be quite poor at that moment, while he may not have a mental illness. Now, someone with a diagnosed mental illness, let's say someone who has a generalized anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, etc., and they're, taking really good care of themselves, and they've identified some really effective coping mechanisms to manage their stress, they may actually have really good mental health. And so it's important just to remember that there are differences, and managing stress kind of applies to everybody. So as most of us are familiar, when we're stressed, our body experiences a stress response. So our stress response is triggered by a perceived threat, and that's the kicker, it's the perceived. When we face situations where we think the demands outweigh our ability to cope effectively, that's when we elicit our stress response. And some physiological changes, things that happen in our body, are a quickening of the pulse, so increased heart rate, a burst of adrenaline, redirection of blood, the release of cortisol and other hormones, and a number of other things. And so while this can be helpful in situations that are actually threatening, because it allows us to flight, fright, or freeze, when we're not faced with an actual threat, it can cause a lot of negative consequences on our body, especially if we're chronically having our stress response elicited. So you see the image of the little animated caveman guy. So our stress response was incredibly helpful and necessary, especially in the caveman days when, a saber-toothed tiger is chasing you. You want the quickening of the pulse and the burst of adrenaline, etc., so you can run away from the threat. However, now, if you have an argument with, someone in your life, if you have too much work on your plate, if you're concerned about the state of the world with COVID, those physiological reactions in your body are probably not going to be very helpful. And so it's important to recognize that when we're feeling stress or experiencing the effects of stress, there's all sorts of things going on inside of us. And what we want to do is learn how to be preventative so we can reduce the amount of stress responses we're having, as well as we want to intervene and reduce these responses when they come on to us. So very quick, I know you probably can't see the fine print, I can't, but I just had to, for the sake of doing a session on stress, um, point out some of the common physical responses that stress can have on our body. And some of these things people are not aware of. So increased depression, headaches, heartburn, insomnia. I think anyone who's experienced a bout of chronic stress will have, the insomnia issues. Rapid breathing, weakened immune system, high blood sugar, high blood pressure, risk of heart attack, pounding heart, stomach issues, so many stomach issues. It can cause fertility problems, erectile problems, missed periods, tense muscles, excess low sex drive. So many things that we may not have associated with stress can be the direct result of poorly managed stress. And so this here is a picture, as you can see, of the tip of the iceberg. So I like to use this sort of like analogy for helping us understand how stress, especially when we're unaware that that's what's kind of going on, can manifest or show itself as many things. So some examples, if we are feeling irritable, angry, moody, or perhaps we have someone in our life that is, frequently irritable, angry, moody, it could very well be that we're seeing the irritability and anger and moodiness on the surface, like the tip of the iceberg, but underneath there's, unprocessed stress. There's poorly managed stress that's, building up. Increased recovery time for almost every injury. So we know that stress can, really weaken our immunity, make us more susceptible to illness, and increase our recovery time. Creates interpersonal conflicts, relationship problems, and really an overall decreased quality of life. So as I said, I don't want to spend a ton of time focusing on all the awful things that stress does to our mind and body. I think we're aware of that. What I want to jump into is the stuff on how we can actually, cope effectively with stress. Before I do that, I'm just going to stop for a second, make sure there aren't any questions, check the little chat box. Anybody have any questions, any thoughts before we carry on? No? Okay, we're good? Awesome. I'm used to facilitating groups multiple times a week, and so they're often very participatory, so you'll have to excuse me for stopping and asking. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything from anybody. All right, so huge point. Just because we are entitled to suffer from stress does not mean that we have to. Now, this is a critical point that many of us don't really understand or accept. I know for a very long time, I had such a difficult time really wrapping my head around this concept. We think that because we have real life, serious problems, that we must endure the suffering. So some common statements that I certainly can relate to, and I'm sure some of you can as well. You would be suffering too if you had to deal with what I deal with. I have a right to be stressed. I have no choice. My situation is just too stressful. My worries are real and could have or will have life-altering consequences. And it's interesting because often that may be the case. However, when we start to take a step back and recognize that we actually have a little bit more control over how stress affects us, life gets a whole lot easier. So this is about learning how to identify ways that we can manage our stress and respond to the inevitable stresses that are going to happen around us in ways that help reduce the amount of suffering we have to experience. So as we all know, life sucks sometimes. That's just how it is. People can be jerks. We can be jerks. We all make mistakes. We're all human. And lots of awful things are happening in the world. They've happened in the past and they're going to happen in the future, right? And that's not, a news flash. However, if we approach life from the perspective that these things shouldn't be happening and I didn't deserve this and, why me? Then often we remain in this place of suffering, feeling as though there is nothing we can do about all of these inevitable stresses and we just have to suffer. And that's not always the case. And so that's what I want to try to get into. So now what? So hopefully I've convinced some of you, if you weren't already aware, that there are some things that can be done to help reduce the suffering associated with inevitable stresses. So let's talk about what we need to do. So the first one and the most common one is reducing vulnerability or building resiliency. And I have to kind of laugh when I see those words now. A while ago, I had a young man in his teenage years who had come in to see me, and I used the word reduce, or the words reduce vulnerability. And he was like, whoa, 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 Sarah, talk human. And we kind of came up with the term instead of, let's build armor, let's armor up, is what he had said. And so this is about learning how we can reduce our vulnerability to stress. Now, my disclaimer is these are the things that when you go into your family doctor's office, they'll tell you, if you could just eat well, sleep well, exercise, and take care of your physical health, all would be well. And so many of us get frustrated with that because it's not that easy. It would be, a whole lot easier for us all to manage stress if we could all eat, fabulously. We could sleep, 8, 10 hours a night uninterrupted. We could get up and, run 5K every day and take perfect care of our physical ailments. However, we all probably can relate to the difficulties that, these things bring with them. And so it's important that while we recognize that these things can help us armor up and be more prepared to deal with the inevitabilities that life will throw at us, we can't all be, perfect at these things. We want to just try to do the best that we can. So a few things that we can consider, however. So eating well, good nutrition. Are there ways that you could improve your eating habits? I think we all probably could in one way or another, especially with COVID going on. Are you drinking too much caffeine? Getting enough water? Sleep hygiene. I know sleep is something that so many people really struggle with when they're dealing with, stress in their life. But is there anything that's within your control that you could change to improve your sleep routine? Could you maybe try to get to bed a little bit earlier? Could you try to control your environment in a way that might help improve your sleep a bit? Exercise. Are you exercising regularly? Are there ways that you could increase the amount of movement you get each day? How often do you stretch? Sometimes, when I'm working with people who are not big into athletics or exercising, like myself, then, even just stretching can be a nice way to get yourself sort of moving and get the blood flowing. And then physical health, taking care of your physical issues. Are there, issues with pain that you could take better care of? And are you doing what you can to optimize your physical wellness? So these are sort of your run-of-the-mill, prescription for managing stress suggestions that most people will already have some familiarity with. But it's important that we, really do take a step back and see if there are ways that we can, get on top of these things so we can armor up and be better prepared for stress that life brings. So the next thing, avoiding unhealthy coping strategies. So it's important for us to recognize that while some behaviors may work in the short run to reduce stress, they often will actually add to our stress in the long run. So some common examples: using alcohol or other substances when we feel stressed, avoiding, denying, refusing to acknowledge stress. I'm fine. Everything's okay. Another really common one: lashing out at others or at yourself, engaging in problematic or avoidance behaviors. So some examples: gambling, shopping, gaming, work, sex, social media. Huge, words here, because social media has become such a big part of people's lives that are feeling stressed and are trying to find ways to get, their minds out of the stress, right? When we're feeling distressed or we're, dealing with a lot, something that we kind of naturally do is we try to get away from that stress. We want some respite. We want to just, go home at the end of the night and engage in a behavior that helps us just let go of that. And hey, you're human. Of course you want to have some respite from that and a break from all of those, stressors that are going on in life. But we really want to take a step back and at least be honest with ourselves, right? So if that, glass of wine, or if, playing video games for a few hours, or, spending multiple hours a day scrolling through Facebook, if those are things that you're using regularly, and you haven't actually took a step back and contemplated the negative effects that they might be having on your life, it might be, helpful to do that. So for example, even small amounts of alcohol for those that don't have dependency issues can really compromise quality of sleep. I'll often hear from people, I'll fall asleep around 10, 11, then they wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and they can't go back to sleep. They're wide awake, worries are going. And usually, not always, but usually that's a direct result from, the behaviors that they're engaging in the night before. So if you're, using alcohol, for example, you'll fall asleep. And then once the alcohol is out of your system, you wake up and then the stress kind of comes to you. For someone who, is open to the idea of trying to abstain from drinking for a period of time, you'd be surprised how your sleep may regulate relatively quickly, for some people a little bit longer. And the I'm fine tactic, there were many people who have grown up in environments that are discouraged from expressing their emotions. That when they say they're stressed, or they say that they're struggling with something, or acknowledge their emotions, they were looked down on, or encouraged to be more stoic, deal with it, suck it up. And we can sometimes get into this pattern of avoiding. And that can be incredibly unhealthy as well. I like to use the analogy of if we keep packing things away, right? It's sort of like a stress comes up, we put it in a box on a shelf, and then we go back to life. And then another stressor comes up, and we put it in that box on the shelf, and we go back to life. Well, eventually, if we don't go back and open that box and let things come out and deal with them and let them go, that box overflows. And that's when we start to feel the effects of chronic stress. And then things like anxiety, depression, etc., can come as well. I'll talk a little bit more about social media and how that affects us momentarily, but I think for now we'll move on. Okay, so being mindful. I know there have been a number of sessions this past week where the presenters have made reference to mindfulness. And it's funny, those of you that have worked with me in the past have probably heard me say, when I was first introduced to the concept of mindfulness, I thought it was, some kind of torture. I found it incredibly unsettling and uncomfortable. I found it very hard when being told to kind of sit in silence and just be. I could not get it. And so it's only been in recent years that I have really started to understand that mindfulness is so much more. It's paying attention to the present moment on purpose. And I know this has been reviewed in some of the other sessions that you've been at, and I'm certain that many of you are familiar with the term mindfulness and things that kind of go along with mindfulness. So I thought what I would do is just introduce a super quick way that you can practice mindfulness multiple times a day. And this is arguably one of the most effective ways to almost immediately reduce your stress. So basically, it's paying attention. That's it, throughout the day. So I just want to challenge you all right now. So in this moment, if you take a step back and think about what your level of distress is from 0 to 10. So 0 would be completely calm, all is well in the world. Up to 10, so distressed, you're losing your mind and you can't cope at all. And thinking maybe about a time in the last week or two when your level was maybe higher than it is right now. It's a Saturday afternoon, you're at home, likely levels of distress hopefully aren't too high, but think of a time when it was a bit higher. If you were to have, or now, take a step back and you were to ask yourself, okay, if I had to, could I reduce my level of distress on demand? So say you're at a 5 or a 7, could you get it down to a 3 or a 5? What would you do in order to get to that lower number? Could you? And I often will say to clients, well, what if I were to offer you, I'm not going to, but what if I were to offer you $5 million? So let's say you've got 20 minutes to get your level of distress to a 1 or a 2 without using any unhealthy coping mechanisms. So you can't smoke a joint or have a drink or, distract with something unhealthy. But by using only relatively healthy coping mechanisms, could you get your level of distress down to a 1 or a 2 if you were going to get $5 million? I suspect that there are many of you that would be like, yeah, for $5 million, I'll figure it out. Well, what would you do, right? And if you don't know what you would do, if you don't have specific techniques and tools in your back pocket that can reduce your level of distress on demand, I encourage you to learn some. And we'll talk about a couple momentarily if you don't have any others, but I suspect many of you do. They often just get pushed aside and aren't sort of fresh in your mind. So Often when I'm working with people, we'll put a plan in place where they can intentionally check in with themselves multiple times a day. So that could be by putting an alarm in their phone. I had a client who, put 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. in her phone, and she'd have a little reminder, check in with yourself or something to that effect. And what she would do is take a step back, gauge how she's feeling, do a quick little body scan. I mean, and we're talking, this takes 2 minutes, and just sort of discover how she's feeling, right? Pay attention to thoughts, sensations, and just, actively try to take a breath, come into the moment, feel your feet on the floor, and just, reduce your level of distress. Sometimes people are so busy throughout the day. I work with a number of school teachers and medical practitioners, and it's like they are just go, 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 go. But we all have to pee. So I say, when you go to the bathroom, at least try to use that time to take a step back and just take a breath. Just check in with yourself for a minute. Be mindful. What am I thinking? What am I feeling? What sensations am I experiencing? And if you can actively get your level of distress down on demand, you will start to feel like you've got a whole lot more control over your life and your circumstances. And if you can be preventative and get your level of distress down before you're going into high stress situations, or perhaps before you're going home at the end of the day if you work out of the house, then it can often help reduce conflicts and just help you, feel better overall. And a big part of poorly managed stress is simply people being lost and not aware of it. We're often so stuck in our heads and we're go, 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 that we just don't take a step back and check in with ourselves once in a while. Okay. So this is probably my favorite concept. So this is the idea of acceptance. So basically, this is very much in keeping with those of you that are familiar with the serenity prayer. So grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So if we are able to take a step back and say, okay, there are two columns in life. There's the stuff I can control, and there's the stuff I can't control. And if we actively turn our mind towards the stuff we can control and radically accept that there is a lot that we can't control, and worrying about it and thinking about it and ruminating about it, as tempting as that may be and as habitual as that may have become for you, incredibly unhelpful. And it is possible to bring yourself over towards the stuff that you can control. So once we kind of determined whatever it is that's going on inside of our mind and the stress that we're experiencing, if it's in the stuff I can control column or the stuff I can't control column, we start to feel a little bit more able to regulate what's going on in our life. So the stuff I can control, is there something I can do right now to work towards resolving this? You can ask yourself that. If yes, then do it, right? Or put a plan in place so you can start to work towards it. If no, then acknowledge it is not within your control and just commit to letting go. And it may not be easy to let go in that moment, but just committing to the idea that if you were able to let go, life could be a whole lot easier. That's half the battle. Stuff I can't control. If there's nothing I can do right now to resolve this, then I can acknowledge that it is not within my control. Focusing time and energy on that which is not in your control creates more stress and prevents you from focusing on that which you can influence. And you'll notice the little image at the bottom of the no news. And so it's interesting, I've done a few talks that are similar to this over the last number of weeks and months, and I always get sort of mixed responses to my perception on news and media. And so I'll try to be gentle when I approach this. However, I, really feel fairly strongly that limiting the amount of news and information that we take in is really important, especially if we're struggling with chronic stress or poorly managed stress and we're suffering and struggling in life. There are a lot of things happening in the world that are, we don't approve of, that we hate that are happening, but in this moment, there's probably nothing that I can do about it. If there is something I can do about it and I'm willing to do it, then I'm going to do it. However, if I can say, is there anything I can do about this? And the answer is no, then that's when I want to give myself permission to say, I don't like that this is happening. I don't approve of it. I wish that it wasn't, but I can't do anything about it. So I'm going to radically accept the fact that it's out of my control and refocus on that which I can control. And the freedom that we gain from that is invaluable. It's crazy how much better I find my life is without acknowledging a lot of what's happening. When it comes to COVID, certainly we have to be very careful and make sure we're following all regulations and we're keeping updated for safety purposes. However, if you are struggling with, let's say, a chronic anxiety condition, or you're having a really difficult time dealing with life on life's terms, take a little bit of a hiatus, right? Abstain for a little bit on world news and just see how much better you feel. I was meeting with a lady virtually from outside of the area just last week, and she starts her day each morning, or had started her day each morning, by opening up her phone when she's still in bed. And I'm willing to bet there are a number of you that do the same thing. And she'd read through the Facebook news feed, I think, and she would, check out the news. And, she was reporting feeling really stressed. And she was talking very passionately about some things that were going on in politics and in the world, all of which were out of her control. And so after a lengthy conversation, she committed to abstaining from news and social media, parts of it, not all of it, for the next week until we met again. And, not surprisingly, by the time we met again, she was feeling a whole lot better. And I understand that this isn't easy. And I understand that for some people, it's absolutely necessary to stay on top of what's happening in the world. But just maybe reflect on what, areas of social media and the news you may be able to limit yourself from, and maybe give it a try and see how you feel. Before we move into the coping skills, I want to stop for a moment and again, just ask if there's anything anybody has to say, anything anyone wants to share, any feedback. Nothing. It's weird being in a room all full of like black boxes. I wish I was in person. All right, I'll just carry on and hope that you're all still there and awake. Coping skills. So as I said, there are so many different coping skills that we can, discuss. If you want coping skills, email me. I will literally send you hundreds from the DBT distress tolerance modules and a multitude of other sources. However, these are some of the skills that I find really helpful for myself and that I have noticed other people that I've worked with throughout the years have also found incredibly helpful, especially when it comes to managing stress effectively. So the first one is the grounding skills. Many of you will have had some experience with this, but before we can do anything else, we have to be grounded, right? We have to find a way to come back into the moment, get outside of the craziness that's going on inside of our head and just be in the now. And that can be really difficult. So the first one that I often will talk to people about is the 5 senses. So right now, I challenge you all to, just stop for a moment. And I want you to look around the room you're in and name 5 things you can see. Now, assuming you've all done that, I want you to touch 4 things with your hands or your body. And say them out loud if you can. Okay. Now I want you to listen really hard. Jon Kabat-Zinn would say, listen like your life depends on it. And identify 3 things you can hear in the environment you're in right now in this moment. And then see if you can smell 2 things. If it's your hair, your clothes, maybe a beverage, the air. And then taste 1 thing, even if it's just the leftover coffee breath or the saliva. And the five senses is a great way, from little children that I work with right up to, veterans who are experiencing extreme trauma, PTSD symptoms. Five senses are so helpful because it brings us into the now. I like the listening one in particular because if you force yourself to listen to the moment, it shuts everything else off and it just grounds us, it anchors us in the now. And this is an easy thing to remember. So, five things you can see, four things you can touch, three things you can hear, two things you can smell, one thing you can taste, and boom, you're in the now. Breathing techniques. If you don't already have a technique that works for you, you've got to find one. Breathing is huge. So, when we were talking about this stress response, breathing is one way that we can elicit the relaxation response. So we can counter the stress response. We can calm things down. And it's quick, it's easy, it's silent. No one knows you're doing it. So you want to try to identify a breathing technique if you don't already. My favorite that I share with anyone that'll listen is the 4-4-6. And so we will also want to be aware of our breathing technique in the sense that we want to make sure that we're breathing abdominally. With children, we'll explain this as belly breathing. So I like to do breathing in to a count of 4 while expanding your belly. Hold it for a count of 4. And then exhale to a count of 6 while you're deflating your belly. And if you are to do that just a few times, ideally in silence, but if that's not possible, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, you'll often feel just your levels of distress coming down a little bit. Another really common one is paced breathing, where you watch a clock for just 1 minute and you try to slow down your breath cycles. So you inhale, hold, and exhale, and you try to extend it as long as you can. And then inhale, hold, and exhale. And you count how many breath cycles you have in 1 minute. If we were to count how many breath cycles we have in 1 minute when we're really stressed, you'd probably count a pretty high number. But if you can get it down to a 4 or 5 or even a 3, again, you'll find yourself come down. Being in this one moment, remembering that although we have a tendency to get really stuck in what's going to happen in the future, what's happened in the past, all we have to worry about is this one moment. And while things may be really difficult in our lives, there might be so much going on that is worthy of our distress. If we focus on one moment at a time, all of a sudden, things are a lot more manageable because we can all do this moment and this moment and this moment, and just bringing ourselves back one moment at a time. The next set of coping skills, I guess you would say, or coping strategy would be the mindfulness, meditation, find your wise mind. So for those of you that are practicing some form of mindfulness or meditation, you'll know what I'm meaning when I say that, a regular practice of some sort when it comes to, practicing being in the moment can be invaluable. It can make an enormous difference in the quality of your life. Simply allowing yourself to find sort of your authentic true self and allowing yourself to just be momentarily. And so I think a number of you are probably familiar with this, but just for those of you that aren't, I wanted to just briefly show you or introduce the 3 states of mind. So for those of you that have seen this before and have participated in some groups with me, it'll be a little bit of a review. I'm going to really quickly go over this. For those of you that might be interested in learning more, this is a DBT skills concept. Marsha Linahan's DBT skills we'll look at momentarily. I'll just show you some references and her manuals if people are interested in learning more about this stuff. But basically, the 3 states of mind is a really nice, straightforward way for us to identify what's happening inside of us at a certain time. So very quickly, we've got our emotion mind on one side. This is when our emotions are driving the bus. This is when we say or do things that we would not have said or done if we were in a more reasonable, rational state of mind. We all get into an emotional state of mind sometimes when our emotions are just really in control. Opposite side, we've got our Sheldon or Spock mind, our reasonable, rational mind where we're pragmatic. We're not thinking with emotion. We're thinking with logic and fact. Now, the wise mind is a combination of both, but it's more than that. It's the part of us deep down that just knows. It's the part of us that is consistent with truth. It's a science-based alternative to what some people may refer to as like a higher power or even God. This concept works very beautifully with major religions. However, it also can be something that is not in a requirement. So this is the idea that we can, find our true self, the part of us that is consistent with our values and our principles and what's really important to us. So when we can get ourselves into a clear state of mind and we can, be in that place of wisdom, that's when the answers come. That's when we can see how our ability to cope is actually there, and life is not so unmanageable that we can't, that we can't carry on, that we will be okay. So I had to, talk a little bit about the three states of mind while I had an opportunity, because for those of you that aren't familiar, it can be a really great way to just find that quiet, peaceful place. Self-compassion. This is probably, something that has become more prominent in my life and in my practice in this last year. So in preparation for a self-love program that I created, I, read everything that I could find that had been written on self-compassion, self-love, etc. And wow, what a journey that has been. We're now doing a weekly group on self-love, and we have different topics, and it is probably my favorite hour of the week. And this is such an important piece when it comes to managing stress and to improving quality of life. If you take a step back and think about, that internal dialogue, the inner critic that we all have, and if you're aware of what's going on inside of you, often you'll probably find this harsh voice, right? It's like we've got this inner bully that is, really not treating us as kindly as we would treat someone else, especially someone that we care about or that we're responsible for. And there are some really great resources that can help us work towards identifying ways of being more compassionate with ourselves. I'll often use the analogy that if we, saw someone else talking to their spouse, their child, their friend, the way we talk to ourselves, we'd be like, whoa, that person is going to be, really messed up. They're being abused, essentially, verbally or however they're being treated. And yet we follow ourselves around all day talking like this, right? Bullying ourselves, and then wonder why some of us may really struggle with self-worth or, succeeding in certain areas because we're, really bullying ourselves all the time. A few resources that you can check out: selfcompassion.org. You'll see I just did a little screenshot on my phone and uploaded it. Great website. In the practices section, she has these written exercises that help you start to identify ways of talking to yourself like you would someone you care about, a friend. And for those of you that are not familiar with this work, you'll be surprised at how harsh our internal dialogue is often and how unhelpful it is. Tara Brach is another self-compassion guru. She has a number of books, one of which is Radical Compassion, really beautiful stuff. And sorry, my screen's mixed up here. Self-love, if this isn't something you've explored, and if you, take a step back and say, do I love myself? Oh, there might be some flushed cheeks and you might feel kind of uncomfortable. But really, if your answer is I don't know or no, you might want to explore this because, living in your being, you're the only person that's with you 24/7 for your entire life. And you want to make sure that that caretaker, which is you, is treating you well and with love and with kindness and gentleness, or it's going to be a long, hard existence. There are some really great meditations for self-love and a book that many people find helpful, I Love Me, The Science of Self-Love, Dr. David Hamilton, some really great techniques that talk about ways that we can really elicit self-compassion and self-love in ourselves. All right, so back to our list of coping skills. Challenging your thinking. So most people that have some, knowledge of mental health treatment will be familiar with CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. However, for those of you that haven't been diagnosed with depression, anxiety, etc., and haven't, had an opportunity to really explore what CBT is, this is something that is beneficial for everyone, especially when it comes to stress. CBT, or challenging our thinking, helps us interpret what's going on around us in an accurate and helpful way. And so it's not the situation or the stress that is creating how we feel. It's what we're telling ourselves about it. And that's why some people seem to just be born with this fabulous way of, dealing really well with stress, where some of us have to work really hard to challenge our thinking so we can interpret things in a way that are more helpful. CBT helps us retrain our brain to do that. A few resources that I like to encourage people to check out. Check the Facts is a skill from the DBT skills. It's in the emotion regulation module. However, simply check the facts, pretty straightforward. I have some worksheets. If you're interested in learning more about that, shoot me an email. I'll have no problem sending it out to you. But basically, when you're in a situation and you start to feel overwhelmed with stress, anxiety, worry, take a step back. Look at it like you would if you were a detective. Only stick to the facts. Look at things objectively, and often we'll find we'll immediately come down. Thought records, some of you are familiar with this worksheet that helps us identify situations and thoughts. It challenges our thinking, helps us see things in more alternative, balanced ways. A really straightforward, easy tool that Dr. Ishmael and our CBT groups will often suggest is an app called Thought Diary. And there are many CBT apps out there, but that's one where there's like a drop-down list of how you're feeling. It helps you identify your thoughts and start challenging them. So what's great about apps is, an app such as this, if you're, at the grocery store in line and you're feeling a strong negative emotion or you're feeling stressed, then you can actually, pull it out there and do it. It's very accessible and easy. I think I put a slide. Yes, I did. So Mind Over Mood, very common manual that we use when we're doing CBT. You can purchase it online. It's maybe $30-ish. And it's a fairly straightforward workbook. It's at a grade 9 reading level. Basically just helps you work through what's going on in life. And it helps you look at things in ways that are more helpful. A really underutilized resource is Anxiety Canada. So it used to be Anxiety BC, and just in the last few years, it's now rebranded as Anxiety Canada. It's a free, no cost, really reputable site that has 3 different portals. There's one for children, one for adults, one for youths or teens. And you actually can go in, create an account at no cost, and start, participating in modules and learning how to deal with a variety of different anxiety-related concerns. And it's user-friendly. There's videos, there's articles. It's really relatable. Excellent resource for parents, for anyone really. And through the Anxiety Canada website, there's actually a free app called MindShift, which is a really helpful tool for also children, teens, adults, and has all sorts of wonderful coping skills that you can use on the spot to help deal with anxiety and or stress. And then finally, talk therapy. So Juliana, who I think is here with us today, created a fabulous list of community resources that are no-cost therapy resources for children, adults, families, etc. I believe it's on our Facebook page. If it's not, I'm sure Juliana will pop it up there, and you can take a look at that. Just because we offer some services at NSTN that are for fee, there are lots of no-fee services in the community. Waypoint, of course, is offering some exceptional CBT through their structured program, and there are a number of other services that offer this as well. So don't let cost get in the way. There are lots of ways that you can access talk therapy. Right. Using humor. So one of our self-love sessions a couple of months ago was focused on humor therapy, we called it, although it wasn't formal humor therapy, which is a registered form of therapy. But the idea is to remember that despite all that is going on in the world and in your life, trying not to take yourself too seriously is so important. I will often meet with people who have very serious circumstances in their lives going on, and it's rare that I'll complete a session without humor making its way in one way or another. Not because I'm insensitive, but because humor is so important when it comes to dealing with life. Trying to look at things in a lighter way can make life so much better. And I think we all know that when we see something or participate in something that's really funny, that gives you that belly laugh, the endorphins that are released and the stress that's reduced is just amazing. And so in our self-love group, when we focused on humor a while ago, I was kind of worried about the content of what people might provide when asking for examples of things that they found funny, because it's, believe me, hard to find appropriate humor online that won't offend someone. So I had people send it to me privately. And I will tell you, despite all that is going on in the world, it was such a fun week for me because, and I shared them, of course, eventually as well. But, everyone has their own brand of humor. Some of us, as guilty as it may make you feel, you enjoyed watching people fall. You may like, dog videos, bloopers. One video that made me laugh hysterically and still does every time is the news bloopers. Anyways, so many different forums for finding humor and for, making yourself laugh. If you're having a bad day and you're super stressful, or you're trying to help encourage someone else to, have a better day, finding a video online that makes you laugh, telling a joke, sharing some humor can make the world of difference. Gratitude. So for those that know me, know that gratitude is like a higher power for me. Gratitude is huge. If we are able to really take a step back and let go of all the things that we are wishing we had, or resisting our existing situations and wishing ourselves into something else, and we could just embrace where we are in this moment, life gets so much easier. And one way that I encourage people to do this, if you're struggling with it, is to just have the internal dialogue of I get to versus I have to. And this is a fun one. So I would encourage you to give this a try. So for example, you get up in the morning, it's like, oh, I have to get out of bed, and I have to have a shower, and I have to, make my kid lunch, and I have to clean off the car if it's winter, and I have to go to the grocery store. So, shift that to I get to, get out of bed with my working legs. I get to have a hot shower. I get to make my beautiful, healthy daughter her lunch. I get to clean off my car, that I get to drive to the grocery store where I get to buy food. And that may sound kind of silly, but you'd be surprised that if you really try to integrate the I get to rather than the I have to's, you'll see how gratitude can really start to play a much larger part in your life. We sometimes get into this mindset that because life is tough, we have to stay in this place of misery. We have to focus on the things that we don't have in order for us to change things and work towards, having more or doing more. When in reality, it's just the opposite. The more we're able to embrace exactly what we have in this moment and allow ourselves to feel that, gratitude, that allows us to keep moving forward in other ways. If gratitude is not something that you actively participate in, I urge you to give it a try. There are so many different ways you can do this. There's gratitude journals. There are, so many gratitude themed things I'm sure that you find online. Gratitude is big. Practicing acceptance. So that's very much in keeping with our two columns, the stuff I can control and the stuff I can't. And on the PowerPoint, I think, we're getting towards the end of time, but I wrote down Marsha's, here we go. I'll quickly go through this. So DBT skills training, Marsha Linahan, you'll see an image of her there. She is the creator of the DBT skills, and she is an incredible woman. Last year, she came out with a sort of a memoir, Building a Life Worth Living, that talks about her life story and how she struggled with mental health issues chronically as a young person, and how her struggles really influenced her creating this form of therapy that is now, of course, world-renowned and incredibly effective at addressing a variety of issues. And so a lot of the concepts that I'm making reference to are directly from the DBT therapy manuals and from Marsha herself. If you're not familiar with her and her work, and you know someone who is struggling with anything in life, check this out. It is such good stuff. I threw a few resources. Again, these are the references that I used in the presentation, but just for your own benefit. There's a very common skills workbook, the first one there that's in green, that people will purchase and work through on their own. The memoir, I'm a bit of a therapy nerd, so I loved the book, but I think there are many of you that would also enjoy it. The DBT skills training manual, now that's a clinician's manual. So if any of you have heard of or have participated in a DBT skills group or a DBT skills informed group, then this is the manual that those skills would be based on. This is the second edition that came out in 2015, I believe. And then, of course, there are groups. And, as horrendous as the COVID situation has been, a silver lining is there are a lot more resources that are accessible to people all over. There are a number of virtual groups happening all over the province that people would not have been able to access previously because of location, mobility, accessibility, but now you can. So if you're interested, or you know someone who's interested in participating in a DBT skills training group, there are lots of resources out there that you can access now that you couldn't before. And so one of the things that Marsha talks about is there are 4 options, and I really like this. And a lot of the clients that I work with will use this as a go-to as well. So she says there are only 4 things you can do. Sorry, my thing's in the way here. When you're struggling with something. So the first thing, or one of the things, would be you can challenge your thinking. So like we said, with the CBT sort of approach, you can check the facts, you can look at your thoughts and see if you can think your way into a situation that is improved. If you can't change your thinking, and no matter how much you try to challenge your thoughts, you're still, struggling, then you may have to fix the problem. You might have to put an action plan in place and work towards a resolution. If you can't challenge your thinking and you can't fix it, then the only thing left often is acceptance. And radical acceptance is not about approving or forgiving or saying we give up. It's about recognizing that there are certain things that are unchangeable as much as we hate them. And by radically accepting that, we can move forward and we can reduce our suffering. So an example might be the sad event of, say, a pet or even a loved one passing away. That's not something we can change. And many of us will suffer for prolonged periods of time and really battle the reality of loss in general. And the concept of acceptance and radical acceptance from Marsha Linahan's perspective is about recognizing that we can be sad and we are entitled to feel those emotions. However, we do not have to allow this suffering to last forever. And there are ways of refocusing our attention on the things that we do have control over. And then finally, there's stay miserable. And I really love having that as an option because we're adults. And there are some days that we are going to just want to swim around in our own crap and we don't want to do anything about the situation. And that's okay. But I really like, when I'm realizing I'm in that state, it's like I'm grumpy, I'm stressed, and I'm just going to stay here. And then when I'm sick and tired of being miserable, then I know there are 3 other options that I can rely on to kind of get myself out of that space. That's a lot of information. So I think that was the end of our coping skills list. Let me go back up. Yeah, and the last one I put here was talk to someone you trust, professional support, individual, or group. And as I said, we have a list of resources that you can access. And if you have questions or thoughts or feedback for me directly, I'm more than happy to hear from you. And I think that is about it. So is there anything anybody wants to say? Anything anybody wants to share?
Wow, that's so much good information. Oh, we've got a message here from Juliana saying the list of resources will be posted on your Facebook page today. So that's wonderful. Yeah, I think a couple of things that stood out for me, and it's so, I just love when I do these things and I think, oh, this will be good. And then something so profound and so simple comes to mind is that we don't have to let the stress overcome us, or I can't remember how you put it, but I think we have to remember that we have some control over some things, and that's how we react to that. The humor piece, while you were talking about the funny things, I was thinking the funniest thing I've seen so far this year is the lawyer who turned into a cat. Zoom trial. I saw that I don't know how many times, and I still think it's hilarious, just the way he was like, it's me, I'm not really a cat. Yeah. And it was such a simple thing that was funny. And then the other thing that really stood out to me is the I get to rather than I have to. And I've heard that so many times. And I think I need to practice that a little more. I think it's such a simple way to change your mindset, right? Is that I'm very fortunate, right? Like, yeah, like you say, I have to go do all this, but no, really I get to because I'm able to, and some people aren't able to do all the things that we're able to do. So we had just one more comment here, is that thanks for the interesting and comforting information. So that's a great testament to you, Sarah. So if there are no more questions, as Sarah said, feel free to email her. You can find them on their Facebook page and their website. But thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us today. I think we are all better off for it. Thank you to today's session sponsor, Viva, and to our title sponsors, Brissette Concrete Forming, Midland Honda, Pure Country 106, and Kicks 104 or 104.1, the dock. Sorry, I've got my radio stations mixed up. Don't forget to check out Phil's in Midland and Penetang to enjoy a meal today. And feel free to join us tonight at 7:30. We'll have some live entertainment with Emma Reynolds. And tomorrow we've got a kickoff, some yoga warm up with Lisa from the Yoga House before you head off to do your adventure. And if you'd like to make a donation, please go to waypointcenter.ca and click on the Get Your Mental Health in Motion link. And again, don't forget, all these sessions are being recorded and posted on our YouTube page. And the Zoom link is the same for all sessions. So I wanted to make sure people understood that. So if you want to join us tonight and tomorrow, it's the same link that you've logged on to today. So thank you so much, Sarah. We so appreciate your time today. And now we can all go out and enjoy some beautiful weather.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. That was lots of fun.
That's great. Thank you. And take care, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, that was awesome. Thanks so much.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. Hopefully you can all enjoy some of this beautiful weather.
Yes.
Yep, heading out shortly. Thanks again.
Okay.
Right.
Goodbye.
Take care. Bye.